example, I'll create a code pin. If you want to follow along, I will put the link in Slack. So whereas arrays are square brackets, objects are curly braces. So if we say const meals equals this, now I have an object. And objects are key value pairs, basically. You have a key, which would be the thing it's indexed by, like the numbers in an array. But this time you can index them by strings or something. So to do that inside the actual object literal, we put key colon value. So for example, breakfast colon Jim Dean breakfast twimage. If I have another key value pair, put a comma in between them. Lunch PBJ. Dinner spaghetti. Why not? Now, an interesting syntactical note. You can actually put a trailing comma on the last one, and that's totally allowed. And you'll find that I tend to do that. It kind of looks a little nasty to leave that just hanging there when there's nothing after it, but there are a couple of advantages. One, when I go back in and add the next thing, I don't have to remember to add the comma above. And secondly, if you are using version control like Git, now the only line that has changed in my new commit is the line where I really added something, right? If I went and added the comma to this line, then this line would be a change too, and it would just kind of clutter up my history. Not a huge deal, but it's just a nice little side benefit of leaving the trailing comma on there. So I tend to do that. A lot of times teams, again, will have kind of a house style that they either do or do not leave the trailing comma on there all the time. So how do you get something out of there? Let's open up our console. So meals is my variable, and that's an object. If we just console log meals, we see the object. If I want lunch specifically out of there, how do I get it? Dot lunch. Yep. I get PBJ. There's another way, though. Brackets. So, like arrays, you can access the individual items using square brackets. In which case, I can't just say square bracket lunch like that, because then it's going to think lunch is a variable. And I'm going to get an error. You just quote it. Because these keys are actually strings. Same thing. I could have written this like this. But as just a nice little piece of syntactic sugar, if your keys follow the naming rules for JavaScript variables, they don't have dashes and spaces and stuff like that in them, then you can leave the quotes out when you use this syntax. Now, when you get them back out using square brackets, you still have to quote them. Or you could put it in a variable. So the other nice piece of syntactic sugar you get if you do leave the quotes out is that you can use the dot syntax. if we had the keys can be any string, so you could totally say second breakfast. If you're a hobbit. But then you can't very well say meals dot second space breakfast, can you? So you would have to use square bracket syntax if you do that. So you need to use the square bracket syntax if your key is not named according to kind of the variable naming rules, or if you have it in, say, a variable or something. So I have const meal equals, or my favorite meal equals dinner, and I want to get dinner out of there. I can't say meals dot my favorite meal. That's going to look for a key that actually has the string my favorite meal as its key, right? We would have to use square bracket syntax, because with the square bracket syntax, it expects a string, and that's what that variable is, right? Spaghetti. So my favorite meal is going to be, putting that in here is just like putting the string dinner in there. And meals, square bracket dinner, is spaghetti. So what if you want to loop over this thing? There's a few ways to do it. There are a couple of different types of loops. But they're none of them are perfect. There's a for each function that you can call. Unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily just do the keys that you defined. The type of inheritance that you have in JavaScript, if you do a for each loop over an object like this, it will also include any inherited properties, which is almost never what you want when you're looping over them. So one way I like to do it, there's a new kind of a loop in recent versions of JavaScript. But what I like to do is get an array of all of the keys that are in here, because you can do that. So we have this nice built-in function, capital O Object.keys. And if you pass an object in there, it makes an array out of just the keys. So then you could loop over that. Now here's a case where we have to use let if you're making a counter. So let's save const keys equals object.keys meals. I less than keys dot length. So length isn't a function in JavaScript, it's just a property. So now what? How would I get say, the current. So if this is an array of all of these meals, how would I get the value at that key inside the loop? So the object is meals, and keys is an array of all of those things. So if it were an array, how would you get the current thing out of there? Right. So keys square bracket I would be breakfast or second breakfast or lunch or dinner. So how would I get the value that's at that key inside meals? Right. Since I don't actually know the name of it, I can't use the dot syntax. So if that's a little much there, you could certainly just say and then, yeah, it'll go through all of them. Jimmy Dream, breakfast, twamage, pancakes, PBJ, spaghetti. Make sense?
Could you do like for each key in keys.length?
You can. That doesn't always do what you want because of inheritance. There's a way to check that. There's something called has-own property. But yeah, feel free to look that up. It is good to know, but we're not gonna add the confusion in class if that's okay. So, man, that's too much code. There's got to be an easier way. If I want to do the same thing to every item in an array, I just want to do the same thing to all of them. Why can't I just say, hey, array, do this for all the stuff in there? Guess what? You can. ES5 added an array method called map. Anybody used another language that has a map function for arrays? Let's check it out. JavaScript array map. Here we go. MDN, our best friend. We have a lot of best friends these days. The map method creates a new array with the results of calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. Calling a provided function on every element in the calling array. Yes, it returns a new array with the results, with the return values of that function. But we don't have to do anything with the return value if we don't want to. So we can just take advantage of the fact that it calls the provided function on every element in the array. Syntax. Map receives a function, which it calls a callback. When we pass a function to another function as an argument, we typically call that a callback because we can safely assume that that function is going to call the one we pass in. It's going to call it back. Okay, so what about this callback? The callback is going to take 3 arguments. The current value, in other words, the current item in the array, the index of the current item being processed, and the array itself. Now, what do we know about JavaScript and function arguments? It doesn't enforce the number of them, does it? So if we're only interested in the current item in the array, we don't even have to mention these 2. We can just leave them out, which actually makes this very, very simple to use. So we could say keys, remember, is our array, which contains all of the keys out of the meals object, right? So keys.map, we know the map function takes another function as its argument. So we'll just do an anonymous function in line. And the first argument that will be passed into this function will be the current item in the array. In other words, this, right? So we could call that current meal. And then we have that, and we don't have to use a counter or anything. So I could then say console log meals square bracket current meal like this. Let's comment this version out. By the way, in both Visual Studio Code and CodePen, if you highlight a line and hit on a Mac Command / Control / on Windows, it'll comment out those lines. Very nice to quickly comment and uncomment multiple lines. Let's refresh this real quick just to make sure we're looking at the output from our new version. Oops. Yep. It does all of them. So quite a bit simpler than this. As long as you're used to the idea that that's what map does. And for something like this, for a one-line function that's never going to be used again, I think doing an anonymous function right inside the parentheses is a pretty good way to do it. I do wish, I don't know, that's an awful lot of parentheses and the word function is just taking up space. Wouldn't it be nice if ES6 happened to introduce a new syntax for creating functions? But I'm sure it didn't do that. Yeah, it did, Bubba. ES6, woo! So that's a quick overview of objects. I'm going to go ahead and start a new video to talk about this other new ES6 feature. Yes, Lynn? No, so this isn't the return value or anything. This is just what that function is doing. So it is just running console log, which just logs to the console. So map only cares what the return value of this is, and because it's going to build an array out of all the return values. So if we said return mega meals current meal, then I could say, I could get the return value and log that, and we could see what it does. Yeah, so we got mega Jimmy Dean breakfast twamich, mega pancakes, mega PBJ, mega spaghetti. But we're not even using that feature of map. The fact that it builds this new array, we don't even care. We just want it to do the same thing to everything in the array. So we're just not even messing with it.
If you didn't assign that to that new array, but you still return values, does it do anything to the original array?
No, it leaves the original array alone. That's why we can get away with this, basically.
So it's really just kind of returning it to nothing. You don't have to.
It's building a big array with the same number of things as we had keys. It's a 4-element array with 4 undefines. Yep. So I'll just copy this version out, and I'll leave this one here. Cool. What's that? Yeah, I did.